The most dangerous lies are the ones protected by a badge. The first rays of autumn sunlight reflected across the polished granite steps of Jefferson Federal Courthouse as attorneys hurried through the front entrance carrying leather briefcases, deputy marshals greeted familiar faces, and reporters searched for the next headline that might unfold before their cameras. It looked like another ordinary weekday inside one of the busiest federal courthouses in the country. Nobody standing outside had any reason to believe that within the next few minutes, one decision would completely change the course of several lives. Marcus Carter walked calmly toward the courthouse doors wearing a charcoal blazer over a crisp white dress shirt, carrying a worn leather portfolio beneath one arm. His pace never changed. He greeted the elderly security volunteer holding the entrance door with a warm smile and quietly thanked him before continuing inside. He looked like an ordinary professional arriving for another day of work. There was nothing about his appearance that demanded attention, and that was exactly how he preferred it. Across the parking area, Detective Ethan Walker watched Marcus from beside an unmarked sedan. His coffee had grown cold long ago, but his attention never drifted. Walker had spent years building a reputation as an experienced detective whose instincts rarely failed. Fellow officers respected his confidence. Prosecutors appreciated how prepared he always appeared. To everyone around him, he looked like a detective who understood exactly how to recognize criminal behavior before anyone else noticed it. This morning, however, his confidence seemed unusually absolute, as though every step had already been rehearsed inside his mind. Marcus approached the courthouse security checkpoint without hesitation. Lawyers passed around him discussing scheduled hearings while court employees carried stacks of legal files toward waiting elevators. The marble lobby echoed with quiet conversations and the distant sound of polished shoes crossing the stone floor. High above, security cameras silently rotated through their programmed paths, recording every movement with mechanical precision. Almost nobody looked up at them. Marcus did. His eyes briefly followed one camera before returning to the entrance ahead. Detective Walker crossed the lobby with calm determination. His posture projected authority without urgency. He stopped only a few feet from Marcus before calling his name in a firm, unmistakable voice that immediately drew the attention of everyone nearby. Conversations stopped. Several attorneys paused in mid-step. A television reporter lowered her microphone and instinctively turned toward the unexpected confrontation. Marcus stopped walking and slowly faced the detective. His expression remained composed, neither surprised nor fearful. Walker politely instructed him to remain where he was while explaining that he needed to conduct an immediate investigation. Marcus nodded once without protest. The surrounding crowd watched silently as Walker performed what appeared to be a routine search. Moments later, the detective reached into Marcus's jacket pocket and produced a small sealed package. A wave of quiet disbelief swept across the lobby. Curious whispers spread through the courthouse entrance as people exchanged uncertain glances. Some immediately assumed they were witnessing another successful arrest by a seasoned detective. Others simply watched, waiting for answers. Marcus looked briefly at the package before meeting Walker's eyes again. He never argued. He never raised his voice. He simply stood there with remarkable composure, as though the outcome of this moment depended upon something far larger than the accusations now filling the courthouse lobby. Hidden above them, multiple security cameras continued recording every second exactly as it unfolded, preserving a silent version of the truth that no one in the room had yet begun to imagine. The quiet murmur inside the courthouse faded almost instantly as courthouse deputies stepped closer, creating a respectful space around Marcus Carter and Detective Ethan Walker. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody rushed forward. Every person standing in the marble lobby seemed to recognize that something significant was unfolding before them. Walker maintained the calm confidence of an experienced detective. Holding the sealed package where everyone could see it, he briefly explained that probable cause required him to continue the investigation. His tone was measured and professional, leaving little room for doubt in the minds of those watching. Several attorneys quietly exchanged concerned looks before returning their attention to the scene. A television reporter lifted a camera, careful not to interfere with courthouse operations, while a courthouse employee quietly directed arriving visitors toward another security lane. Marcus remained exactly where he stood. His leather portfolio rested on a nearby inspection table, untouched. He made no attempt to interrupt Walker, and he offered no emotional response to the growing attention surrounding him. Instead, he calmly acknowledged every instruction given to him with quiet respect. That unexpected composure unsettled more than one observer. A young deputy marshal standing nearby had witnessed countless courthouse arrests over the years. Most people immediately protested, asked questions, or insisted that a mistake had been made. Marcus did none of those things. His breathing remained steady. His posture never changed. He simply watched the people around him with thoughtful eyes, as though carefully remembering every face and every detail inside the lobby. Walker interpreted the silence as acceptance. He thanked the courthouse security staff for their cooperation before requesting that Marcus accompany him to a nearby interview room while the matter was documented. Marcus nodded once without hesitation. As they walked together across the polished stone floor, dozens of quiet conversations followed behind them. Some visitors assumed another criminal case had just begun. Others wondered why the man at the center of the investigation appeared calmer than the detective leading it. Near the entrance, an elderly courthouse volunteer slowly shook his head, unable to reconcile Marcus's respectful demeanor with the accusations he had just witnessed. High above the lobby, multiple security cameras continued rotating through their programmed positions, capturing every movement from overlapping angles. Their presence blended naturally into the architecture, almost invisible beneath recessed lighting and polished ceilings. Marcus briefly glanced upward once again before following the deputies through a secured hallway leading deeper into the courthouse. The gesture lasted only a second, yet it seemed almost intentional. Walker never noticed it. Inside the interview corridor, courthouse employees continued their morning routines without interruption. Clerks carried stacks of legal filings between offices. Attorneys reviewed motions while waiting outside courtrooms. Judges' assistants checked hearing schedules posted beside heavy oak doors. The building itself continued operating with the precise rhythm expected of a federal courthouse, even as an unusual case quietly developed within its walls. Marcus was seated in a simple waiting room furnished with little more than a wooden table, several chairs, and an American flag standing beside the wall. A deputy politely offered him a bottle of water, which he accepted with a grateful smile. He thanked the deputy by name after reading the nameplate on the uniform, a small gesture that caught the young officer by surprise. Few people under investigation noticed details like that. Even fewer remained courteous enough to express appreciation. Outside the room, Detective Walker began organizing his paperwork for the preliminary hearing. Every report appeared complete. Every document seemed properly arranged. Looking over the neatly ordered file, he allowed himself a quiet sense of satisfaction, believing the difficult part of the morning was already behind him. He had no reason to suspect that the most important evidence in the entire courthouse had never been inside his folder at all. By the time the preliminary hearing was scheduled to begin, the atmosphere inside Jefferson Federal Courthouse had changed in subtle ways that only experienced courtroom professionals seemed to notice. The building still moved with its familiar rhythm. Clerks carried stacks of motions through quiet hallways. Attorneys reviewed case law outside heavy oak courtroom doors. Court officers exchanged routine greetings while checking the morning calendar. Yet beneath that ordinary routine, a quiet sense of curiosity followed the unusual arrest that had taken place only minutes earlier. Marcus Carter remained seated inside the waiting room, his leather portfolio resting neatly on the table beside him. He had not asked to make a telephone call. He had not demanded immediate legal representation. He had not questioned anyone's authority. Instead, he patiently observed everything around him with calm attention. Every sound seemed to matter. Every conversation passing through the hallway became another detail quietly stored away. The young deputy who had earlier offered him a bottle of water found himself increasingly puzzled. During his years working courthouse security, nearly every person facing serious accusations displayed some combination of frustration, fear, or desperation. Marcus displayed none of those emotions. He thanked every employee who entered the room. He politely stood whenever someone addressed him. His voice never became louder than necessary. The deputy eventually asked whether there was anything else he could provide. Marcus smiled politely and replied that everyone had already treated him with professionalism. The answer lingered with the deputy long after he stepped back into the hallway. Detective Ethan Walker, meanwhile, walked confidently toward Courtroom 3 carrying a neatly organized evidence binder beneath his arm. Every report appeared complete. Every page had been carefully arranged according to procedure. He exchanged confident greetings with several courthouse employees who recognized him from previous investigations. More than one prosecutor commented that Walker always seemed prepared. He accepted the compliments with quiet satisfaction, believing another successful case was about to reinforce the reputation he had spent years building. As Walker approached the courtroom entrance, he briefly paused beside a display monitor listing the day's hearings. Several attorneys stood nearby discussing scheduling issues while a gray-haired bailiff carefully reviewed seating assignments inside the courtroom. The bailiff glanced toward Walker's evidence binder before casually looking away. Years of courtroom experience had taught him that confidence could be helpful, but documentation always mattered more than appearances. Across the hallway, an unfamiliar man wearing a tailored navy business suit entered the courthouse carrying a slim black portfolio. He moved without urgency, nodded respectfully to courthouse staff, and quietly took a seat near the back of the public gallery outside Courtroom 3. Nothing about his appearance attracted attention. He did not introduce himself. He did not approach Marcus. He simply observed the hallway with calm patience while occasionally checking the time on his wristwatch. Marcus noticed him immediately but offered no visible reaction. Their eyes met only once for the briefest moment before Marcus calmly looked away again. Anyone watching would have assumed they were complete strangers. Only the quiet understanding reflected in Marcus's composed expression suggested that the morning might still hold unexpected developments. Above the hallway entrance, another courthouse security camera continued recording every arrival, every conversation, and every movement with perfect consistency. Hidden inside the courthouse digital archive, each second was being preserved exactly as it happened. Detective Walker believed the strongest evidence rested securely inside the binder he carried into court. Marcus seemed equally confident, yet his confidence appeared to rest somewhere entirely different, somewhere silent, impartial, and impossible to persuade. The heavy oak doors of Courtroom 3 opened precisely at 9 o'clock, and the quiet conversations filling the hallway dissolved into respectful silence as attorneys, courthouse staff, and members of the public took their seats. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long patterns across polished wooden benches and the seal of the United States displayed behind the elevated bench. Judge Rebecca Lawson entered the courtroom with calm professionalism, and everyone rose before taking their seats once again. The atmosphere carried the familiar discipline of a federal courtroom where every word mattered and every document became part of an official record. Marcus Carter entered under the supervision of courthouse deputies, walking with the same steady composure he had maintained since arriving at the courthouse that morning. His expression revealed neither frustration nor fear. He acknowledged every instruction respectfully and quietly took his assigned seat. Several people in the public gallery studied him with curiosity, expecting the anxiety usually seen in someone facing serious allegations. Instead, they found a man who appeared remarkably patient, almost as though he understood something no one else in the room had yet discovered. Detective Ethan Walker entered moments later carrying his evidence binder with unmistakable confidence. He greeted the assistant prosecutor with a firm handshake before organizing his documents across the counsel table. Every folder rested in perfect order. Every report appeared complete. Years of courtroom experience showed in the way he carried himself, and several courthouse employees exchanged quiet remarks about his reputation for presenting organized investigations. Walker believed this hearing would be no different. When Judge Lawson invited the government to summarize the matter before the court, Walker calmly explained the events that had unfolded inside the courthouse lobby. His voice remained measured and professional as he described observing suspicious circumstances, conducting a lawful investigative detention, and discovering the sealed package during the search. Each sentence flowed naturally into the next, supported by neatly arranged paperwork placed before the court. To anyone hearing the account for the first time, it sounded complete and convincing. The assistant prosecutor reviewed the reports while occasionally nodding in agreement, and several observers sitting behind the gallery rail quietly accepted Walker's version of events without question. Marcus listened attentively from his seat. He did not interrupt. He did not object. He simply watched the proceedings with quiet focus, occasionally shifting his attention toward the official court reporter whose fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard, preserving every spoken word exactly as it was delivered. He then glanced briefly toward the discreet security cameras positioned high along the courtroom walls before returning his attention to the bench. Judge Lawson noticed the subtle movement but continued listening without comment. Near the rear of the gallery, the unfamiliar man wearing the tailored navy business suit remained seated with his slim black portfolio resting across his lap. He had not spoken to anyone since entering the courthouse. From time to time, he quietly reviewed a single page inside the portfolio before closing it again, careful not to attract unnecessary attention. His calm demeanor blended perfectly into the courtroom, yet his presence carried a quiet purpose that remained invisible to nearly everyone around him. As Detective Walker concluded his presentation, confidence settled across his face. From his perspective, every necessary fact had been placed before the court, every procedural step appeared properly documented, and every piece of evidence seemed to reinforce the same conclusion. Yet hidden beneath the orderly rhythm of testimony, official transcripts, and carefully prepared reports, several unnoticed details had already begun moving toward one another like pieces of a puzzle, waiting for the precise moment when the courtroom would no longer be guided by assumptions alone but by the complete picture the evidence was quietly preparing to reveal. As the hearing moved forward, the courtroom settled into a rhythm that seemed almost predictable. Detective Ethan Walker remained composed, answering procedural questions with the confidence of someone who had testified dozens of times before. Every document he referenced appeared neatly organized, every date seemed carefully recorded, and every statement sounded consistent with the written reports already before the court. To most observers, the hearing appeared to be progressing toward an ordinary conclusion. Judge Rebecca Lawson continued reviewing each exhibit with deliberate care, occasionally making notes in the margin of the file before asking brief questions designed to clarify the sequence of events. The assistant prosecutor compared the evidence inventory with the accompanying documentation while the official court reporter preserved every spoken word with flawless precision. Marcus Carter remained silent throughout the exchange. He never attempted to interrupt the testimony. He never displayed frustration. His attention drifted only briefly toward the security cameras mounted near the rear corners of the courtroom before returning to the judge. That subtle movement happened more than once, and although almost no one else noticed, Judge Lawson quietly did. Years on the federal bench had taught her that unusual confidence often deserved closer attention than dramatic emotion. Near the evidence table, the assistant prosecutor carefully reviewed the chain of custody form attached to the sealed package. Her eyes paused on one section longer than expected before she quietly turned another page. She did not raise an objection, yet the slight hesitation was visible to the experienced bailiff standing several feet away. He had supervised courtroom security for more than 2 decades and understood that even the smallest irregularity in documentation could eventually become significant. He glanced briefly toward Detective Walker before returning to his neutral expression. Across the public gallery, the unidentified man wearing the tailored navy suit finally opened his slim black portfolio. Instead of removing thick files or dramatic evidence, he simply confirmed the order of several sealed folders marked with official tabs before closing the portfolio once again. His actions were calm, disciplined, and almost invisible to everyone except Marcus, who acknowledged the movement with the faintest shift of his eyes before looking back toward the bench. Their silent awareness of one another remained unnoticed by the rest of the courtroom. At that same moment, a courthouse information technology specialist quietly entered through a side door carrying a secured tablet used to access the courthouse digital recording system. After speaking briefly with the courtroom clerk, the technician remained seated near the rear wall, waiting without interruption. The arrival appeared completely routine. Federal courthouses frequently relied upon technical staff whenever authenticated digital records might become necessary during proceedings. Detective Walker paid almost no attention to the technician. His confidence remained fixed upon the documents arranged before him, believing the written reports would continue guiding the hearing exactly as planned. Judge Lawson closed one folder and reached for another. Before opening it, she looked once toward both counsel tables and then toward Marcus. The courtroom grew noticeably quieter, not because anyone had spoken, but but because the accumulation of small details had begun to create an unmistakable sense that something larger was waiting just beyond the next question. A hesitant pause over a chain of custody form, an unidentified observer carrying sealed documents, repeated attention toward courthouse cameras, and the arrival of technical staff all appeared ordinary when viewed separately. Together, however, they formed the outline of a story that had not yet been revealed, and although Detective Walker still believed he controlled the direction of the hearing, the foundation beneath that confidence had begun to shift in ways no written report alone could prevent. When the hearing resumed, the atmosphere inside Courtroom 3 had changed in a way that no one could fully explain. Nothing visible had happened, yet the confidence that had filled the room only minutes earlier had quietly begun to shift. Judge Rebecca Lawson reviewed the newest documents placed before her with careful attention, occasionally comparing them to the materials already entered into the record. She paused over one sealed submission before looking toward the courtroom clerk and confirming that every document had been received through the proper federal procedure. Only after that confirmation did she continue. Detective Ethan Walker remained standing beside the counsel table, convinced that the hearing still rested upon the strength of his investigation. He watched the judge review the paperwork without concern, believing that none of it could outweigh the evidence he had already presented. Marcus Carter remained seated with the same composed expression he had carried since the morning began. He neither celebrated nor appeared anxious. His calm presence contrasted sharply with the growing curiosity spreading throughout the courtroom. The unidentified man in the tailored navy suit slowly rose from his seat in the public gallery and respectfully requested permission to address the court regarding newly submitted federal documentation directly related to the integrity of the proceedings. Judge Lawson considered the request for a brief moment before granting permission. Every conversation inside the courtroom stopped. The attorney approached the front carrying the same slim black portfolio that had remained closed throughout the hearing. He placed it carefully upon the counsel table, removed a dark blue credential wallet, and presented official identification for the court's review. The assistant prosecutor examined the credential first, then quietly handed it to Judge Lawson. Her expression changed almost immediately. She nodded once before returning the identification and inviting counsel to continue. Detective Walker watched the exchange closely, his confidence giving way to the first visible sign of uncertainty. The attorney explained that additional information had become available concerning the circumstances surrounding the morning's detention and requested permission from Marcus Carter to identify himself in his official capacity. Judge Lawson agreed. Marcus slowly stood and walked toward the bench with measured steps. Reaching inside his jacket, he removed a federal credential holder that had remained unseen throughout the morning. Without dramatic movement or raised emotion, he respectfully presented it to the judge. Judge Lawson carefully examined the credential, read it a second time, and then looked directly at Marcus before returning it with quiet professionalism. She then addressed the courtroom in a calm voice, stating that the record would reflect Marcus Carter's official assignment with the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice and that newly submitted materials required immediate consideration before the hearing could continue. A ripple of surprise moved silently through the gallery. Several attorneys exchanged astonished glances. The young deputy who had earlier offered Marcus a bottle of water lowered his eyes for a moment, finally understanding the unusual composure he had witnessed all morning. Detective Walker remained motionless. For the first time since stopping Marcus in the courthouse lobby, he realized the assumptions that had guided the entire proceeding might no longer withstand closer examination. Judge Lawson ordered the newly submitted federal documentation entered into the record and instructed the courtroom to prepare for authenticated digital evidence that would assist the court in determining the complete sequence of events. The hearing had not erupted into chaos. There had been no dramatic confrontation and no raised voices. Yet everyone present understood that the balance of the courtroom had quietly changed, and from that moment forward, the truth would no longer depend upon confidence or reputation but upon evidence capable of speaking for itself. The courtroom remained perfectly still as the clerk finished entering the newly submitted federal documents into the official record. Every pair of eyes shifted toward the large courtroom monitor mounted beside the witness stand. Judge Rebecca Lawson confirmed that the digital materials had been authenticated through the Courthouse Information Technology Office and preserved according to established federal procedures before authorizing their review. The information technology specialist stepped forward, connected the secure evidence system, and quietly confirmed that the recordings had remained in official custody from the moment they were archived. No one in the courtroom spoke while the first video appeared on the screen. A timestamp displayed the exact minute Marcus Carter entered the courthouse that morning. The recording showed attorneys crossing the marble lobby, courthouse employees greeting visitors, and security officers directing people toward the screening stations. Every movement appeared ordinary. The assistant prosecutor carefully compared each timestamp displayed on the monitor with the written reports already admitted into evidence. Judge Lawson followed the sequence frame by frame, occasionally making notes while the official court reporter documented every development. Detective Ethan Walker stood silently beside the counsel table. His attention never left the monitor. The confidence that had accompanied him throughout the hearing slowly gave way to careful concentration as the recording continued without interruption. The camera angle changed automatically, showing another section of the lobby from a different perspective. Marcus appeared once again, carrying the same leather portfolio described earlier in testimony. He greeted the elderly volunteer at the entrance before walking toward the security checkpoint exactly as several witnesses had remembered. Seconds later, Detective Walker entered the frame from the opposite side of the lobby. The synchronized recordings continued from multiple cameras positioned throughout the building, creating a continuous timeline that required no explanation from any witness. Every arrival, every step, and every interaction unfolded in chronological order. The courtroom watched in complete silence. Judge Lawson requested that the recording be paused briefly at several moments so the timestamps could be compared with the sequence described in the investigative reports. The assistant prosecutor quietly examined the corresponding documents while the clerk verified each exhibit number already entered into the record. The experienced bailiff folded his hands in front of him and observed without expression, recognizing that objective evidence often carried greater weight than confident testimony. Marcus remained seated with the same calm demeanor that had puzzled everyone since the beginning of the hearing. He never looked toward the monitor. Instead, he kept his attention on the judge, allowing the authenticated recordings to speak entirely for themselves. The attorney representing the Department of Justice respectfully explained that the purpose of presenting the digital evidence was not to reach conclusions prematurely but to ensure that every fact considered by the court rested upon independently preserved records rather than assumption or memory. Judge Lawson acknowledged the explanation and instructed everyone present that the court would evaluate the complete sequence before drawing any legal conclusions. Around the gallery, the earlier whispers had disappeared. Attorneys who had initially accepted the case as routine now leaned forward with quiet attention. Even courthouse employees accustomed to daily hearings recognized that the proceeding had become something far more significant than anyone expected when the morning began. Detective Walker remained composed, yet the certainty reflected in his posture had noticeably faded. The courtroom no longer revolved around competing opinions or professional reputations. It revolved around authenticated evidence, documented procedure, and an impartial record preserved long before anyone realized how important those quiet cameras mounted above the courthouse lobby would ultimately become. The final recording ended, and the courtroom remained silent for several long moments as Judge Rebecca Lawson carefully reviewed her notes alongside the authenticated timeline that had just been presented. The evidence had not relied upon emotion, reputation, or speculation. It consisted of preserved digital records, documented procedures, official timestamps, and materials that had entered the courtroom through established legal channels. One by one, the individual details that had seemed unrelated throughout the morning now fit together with remarkable clarity. The assistant prosecutor respectfully requested additional time for independent review of the newly presented materials and acknowledged that the authenticated recordings raised important factual questions requiring further examination before any conclusion could properly be reached. Judge Lawson agreed. She explained that the strength of the justice system depended upon its willingness to follow verified evidence wherever it led, even when the outcome differed from initial expectations. She ordered that every relevant digital recording, access log, evidence document, and chain of custody record remain preserved under federal procedure while the appropriate review continued. She further directed that the matter proceed through the proper channels for independent evaluation, ensuring that every party involved would receive a fair and impartial examination of the facts. Detective Ethan Walker remained standing quietly beside the counsel table. Earlier that morning, confidence had guided every step he had taken through the courthouse. Now his attention remained fixed upon the official record before him. No one celebrated his discomfort. No one mocked him. The courtroom itself reflected something far more important than personal victory. It reflected a legal system willing to pause, examine, and verify before reaching judgment. Marcus Carter gathered his leather portfolio only after Judge Lawson formally concluded the hearing for the day. Before leaving, he respectfully thanked the court for its professionalism and acknowledged the deputies, clerks, and court staff who had treated every person in the courtroom with courtesy regardless of circumstance. The young deputy who had offered Marcus a bottle of water earlier that morning quietly nodded as Marcus passed, understanding that calm dignity had revealed more character than any argument ever could. The unidentified attorney from the Department of Justice closed the slim black portfolio and departed without seeking attention, allowing the official record to remain the center of the day's events rather than any individual personality. Outside Jefferson Federal Courthouse, the afternoon sun reflected across the wide granite steps where the morning had begun with uncertainty and assumption. Reporters waited near the entrance, hoping for dramatic statements, but Marcus simply thanked them for respecting the ongoing legal process and continued walking toward the city sidewalk with the same quiet confidence he had carried from the very beginning. Behind him, courthouse employees resumed their ordinary routines, attorneys prepared for the next scheduled hearing, and another day of federal proceedings continued almost exactly as before. Yet everyone who had witnessed the hearing carried away the same lesson. Authority earns respect only when it remains accountable to truth. Evidence speaks most clearly when preserved with integrity. And justice is never strengthened by the loudest voice in the room. It is strengthened by patient facts, careful procedure, and people willing to let the truth stand on its own. A badge may symbolize public trust, but public trust survives only when every action can withstand the light of honest examination, because in the end, lasting justice belongs not to power, but to truth that no assumption can erase.